Way too early win prediction for Syracuse football in 2025.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on this week's Poll Friday, I asked you guys the question. I wanted to take the temperature of the fan base. Your early Syracuse football 2025 regular season win prediction. So we're not factoring in a potential bowl game, just your gut feeling on the first 12 games of Syracuse football's season. Now, it's early, sure, but a lot of the initial transfer moves are probably done, and we'll see what Syracuse football does in the spring. As far as my prediction for how I think Syracuse football is going to do in 2025, I am leaning towards 6-6 or 7-5 prior to a bowl game, of course. And you guys voted this week, and you tend to agree with me. There were about 200 votes on this week's Poll Friday. In first place was 7-9 wins at 60%. In second place was 4-6 wins at 29%. In third place, 10+ wins at 11%. And in fourth, 1-3 wins, 0%. Literally, not a single person voted for Syracuse football to finish 3-9 or worse. And I agree with you all. They are not going to go 3-9 or worse. So I guess I'm stuck between 6 and 7 wins, honestly. And there are two reasons why I think Syracuse is going to take a slight step back in terms of win-loss record from 2024 to 2025. Number one is the schedule. It's arguably the toughest schedule in all of college football next season. That's not hyperbole. Syracuse football next year is going to face 4 teams that were in the 2024 college football playoff. Week 1, they got Tennessee in Atlanta, Georgia. That's going to be a fun one, neutral site to open up the season. But also, you got at SMU, you got at Clemson, and you got at Notre Dame. Oh, by the way, not only are those 4 college football playoff teams from 2024, including the semifinalist in Notre Dame, they're all away from the dome. So they will not have the dome advantage in any of those games. Tennessee, at least, is not a true road game. That's neutral site. But that's not easy, the fact that those 4 names are not going to be inside the friendly confines of the JMA Wireless Dome. The other road games on Syracuse's schedule next season, at Miami and at Georgia Tech. Miami has reloaded. No, they will not have Cam Ward, but Carson Beck is a pretty good quarterback in his own right. And Georgia Tech, I think, is a very similar team, or at least a similar goal to what Syracuse could be. Georgia Tech was a very, very good 7-5 team in 2024. They just had a brutal schedule, and I could see that working the exact same way for Syracuse this upcoming season. Now, the silver lining, for those that are watching or listening to this podcast who might think that I'm such a Debbie Downer, I'll give you the silver lining. If Syracuse football does win 10+ games, which is what 11% of you guys voted, if they do, they will get heavy college football playoff consideration, because think about that schedule again. I mean, they're going to have to beat some really good teams to get to 9-10 wins. Whereas this past season, when they went 9-3 in the regular season, let's say you flip one of those games. Let's say they beat Stanford, right? They get that 4th down stop. They hold on. They beat Stanford. And every other result from the season holds true. I don't think Syracuse football gets into the playoff at 10-2 with their schedule they had the previous season. Not to say that it was the easiest in the world. It turns out it was actually a little bit more difficult than originally thought. But still, they probably don't get in at 10-2. They would have probably ended up like Miami, the team right behind Alabama, who was 9-3, who was right behind SMU. So that's where I think Syracuse goes. But if the Orange go 10-2 with this schedule that they have, assuming that they don't get absolutely annihilated in the 2 losses, they might actually be in the college football playoff. I mean, take your pick on which teams are going to have to be. Notre Dame, Clemson, Tennessee. If they go 10-2, they win one of those games by default. at Miami, at Georgia Tech. So it's a tough schedule, but if they do really well, they will get heavy consideration for the college football playoff. I'm Jackson Holzer. This is Locked On Syracuse. This is an early Syracuse football regular season win prediction. I'm thinking either 6-6 or 7-5, which is what the majority of you guys who voted this week agreed upon as well. Now, coming up, I'll give you the second reason why I think Syracuse is going to take a slight step back. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Attending NFL playoff games is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, and the connection with other fans are unmatched. I remember the thrill of seeing my favorite team clinch a playoff win. It was the New York Jets. The last time they won a playoff game was in 2010 against New England. It's been a long time, but I was like 8 years old when that happened. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff to show you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters, actually being there. I used Game Time Picks to grab tickets for an upcoming playoff game, and it couldn't have been easier. I found a super deal that gave me incredible value for amazing seats, and I could even preview the view from my seat before buying. The all-in pricing is a game changer. No surprise fees at checkout, plus knowing my tickets are backed by the Game Time guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKED. ONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Syracuse football faces arguably the toughest schedule in the country in 2025. But another reason why I think they could take a step back in terms of wins and losses from 2024 to 2025 is because of the experience on this year's roster, or really I should say lack thereof, the inexperience of this year's team coming up. The 2024 roster, if you look at the majority of the major contributors for Syracuse football, most of them were upperclassmen. I mean, 9 names jump out at the top of my head. I wrote it down that are not even going to be back next season. Kyle McCord, Jackson Meeks, Aronde Gadsden, LaQuinn Allen, Savion Washington, Marlo Wax, Justin Barron, Clarence Lewis, Elijah Clark. It's a lot of experience and a lot of talent that's out the door from 2024 to 2025. Now, this year's team, I think, is going to be a lot younger. And it's clear that Fran Brown's plan is to build from within, take big high school recruiting classes, develop the players, and eventually use the portal to shore up any holes that, well, maybe a player or two just doesn't pan out like we thought, right? They took 35 high school recruits in the class of 2025, and that led the nation. And oh, by the way, Syracuse football's starting quarterback for 2025, whoever is starting in week 1, which we don't know for sure who's going to start against Tennessee, but regardless of who it is, I've said this before, it's going to be someone making their first ever collegiate start at quarterback. Ricky Collins, Jakari Williams, Luke Carney, true freshman, Rich Bellin, true freshman, Michael Johnson Jr. None of those 5 quarterbacks have ever made a start at the collegiate level. That doesn't mean that whoever starts is going to be bad, but it also doesn't mean we don't know if they're going to be good or not. What I'm trying to tell you is that we don't have a definitive floor-ceiling combination for any of these quarterbacks, whereas last year with Kyle McCord, kind of had an idea of what his floor would be. I think, at least my opinion on him was that he was going to be at minimum pretty good, and at maximum, well, I think he honestly exceeded my maximum expectations, but it would have been close to what he actually did. That's the bottom line. We had a more definitive, more clear floor-ceiling combination for Kyle McCord than we do for these quarterbacks. And oh, by the way, if you're thinking about how Syracuse football can possibly overachieve for this upcoming season, it comes down to quarterback play. It really does, because if someone from that group of 5 emerges, right? If someone emerges, they can elevate the talent around them on offense. And so at least offensively, they can be a better team. And hey, maybe they can overachieve with their schedule. But I think the bottom line is this. I think it's going to be pretty difficult with their schedule and lack of experience on the roster to do a 9-3 season all over again, and eventually a 10-3 season by winning a bowl game. But unlike the previous time where Syracuse football won 10 games, which was in 2018, and then they cratered in 2019 by going, I believe, 4-8 was their record, and then 2020 we don't ever speak of. I think Fran Brown has a better plan than that Syracuse football team did from 2018 to 2019. They're going to be a younger team in 2025, and the year is really going to be about, obviously, you want to win as many games as possible, but it's really going to be about which young players step up and could be potential building blocks for the foreseeable future for Syracuse football. I'd love to hear from you in the comments section below, your early thoughts on the schedule and the experience on the roster, and whether or not you think Syracuse football can replicate its 9-3 season. Do you think they might go higher than that? Do you think they're going to take a slight step back? Are you nervous? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. As far as what is coming up on the podcast, well, tonight we got one more mini podcast for you all, because Syracuse football appears to be closing in on hiring a new special teams coach to replace the fired Jim Villano. It's Ricky Brunfield, from Georgia Tech. That'll be a mini podcast tonight. And tomorrow, Syracuse basketball is taking on Pitt at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, and there will be a full post-game reaction podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. For your second listen, you can check out Locked On ACC. I just hosted the most recent episode with Kenton Gibbs. We talked about the final AP poll for football in 2024. We also talked some hoops. Louisville has been on fire. Also, who else besides Duke within the conference, right? And we certainly kept it real, and we told you where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. Find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really like the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And I will see you all in maybe an hour or two with another mini podcast.